Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. Today we're going to do a video on mortise chisels, and I'm going to review what you might consider to be the more expensive versus the far less expensive, that being the Lie Nielsen and the Narex, and the results may surprise you when you see the differences between the two. Stick around. I'm Rob Cosman, and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new to our channel, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, which will alert you whenever we release a new video. Anytime we use a new tool or technique, we'll leave a description down below so that make it easier for you to find. All right, let's get back to work. If you chop mortises by hand or complete the mortise and tenon joint primarily with hand tools, then you're going to need good chisels. In fact, the mortise and tenon joint is determined, when properly done, by the mortise chisel. That dictates the width of the mortise and obviously the tenon. You're not going to go in and cut a 5/8 mortise with a 1/2-inch mortise chisel. Most important thing in chopping this is that those sides remain parallel. What I'm talking about is this side and that side of the actual mortise. So if you have a chisel and you cut it to that size, ideally you're going to come up with sides that are not only square to the face but parallel to one another. Why is that so important? Well, that means that when you put this tenon in, you're going to actually get positive contact on both sides with the walls of the mortise. That gives you a good glue surface, makes for a strong joint. But how do you know? There's not a lot of information out there because this is not a very commonly completed joint anymore, at least by hand. There was a time when I would think it was the standard in the industry that all good furniture was built with mortise and tenon joints anytime you had two pieces coming together, an example of a stretcher and a leg, or particularly on chairs. So we're going to tear these apart. I'm going to give you some of the things to think about. I'm going to tell you why I think certain features are critical in order for that chisel to work. We'll do a little bit of sharpening on it, and we'll actually show you the process of chopping a mortise, or at least how the chisel works in that particular procedure. So sit back, get a notepad. These are some things that you may want to write down so that when you go shopping, you get the mortise that's going to work best for you. Now, in offering a disclaimer, I actually have a history with Lie Nielsen. I represented them in Canada from 2000 to 2008. I was actually around when the chisels were being developed, and I got to put my 2 cents in, particularly on the mortise chisels. However, I no longer sell them, so I don't benefit financially from that. Now, we run a program called the Purple Heart Project where we bring in combat wounded veterans and we treat them to a week of hand tool woodworking. We send each vet home with several $1,000s worth of tools, and Lie Nielsen has been very generous in giving us a couple of mortise chisels for each vet every time we teach the class. So I'm hopefully not going to let that cloud the information I'm going to share with you, but I want you to be able to see through it. So I'm going to tell you the hows and the whys, then you can decide for yourself. Lie Nielsen is on my right, the Narex is on my left. The Lie Nielsen is a 1/2 inch. It's made in Maine in the United States. The Narex, this is a 12 millimeter, and it's made in the Czech Republic. The Lie Nielsen costs $65 US. The Narex is $25 US. And you'll see the reason why, the difference in price. Now the handle on the Lie Nielsen, this is referred to as a socket style chisel. So if you tap the handle, it'll come off. So you have a socket on the steel portion, and you have a part of the handle that has the exact same shape, and it's literally a friction fit. So you just wrap it in there and it'll hold it in place. Now, the downside to this, it's nice that the fact that when you're pounding on it, the socket keeps it from splitting, and it's traditionally always been the way good chisels have been made. The downside, as I mentioned, is that sometimes the handles fall off, especially if you don't use it for a long time. The wood is constantly moving, absorbing and giving off moisture. And I've had it happen. You're carrying your chisel after sharpening by the handle, and of course, it's always over a concrete floor. The metal falls off and the point hits first. So that is the downside that I've experienced. The Narex has what we would call a tang style. So the handle, the steel actually goes up into the handle, and there's a ferrule here that keeps it from splitting. So as you're pounding on the end of this, there's another ferrule here that keeps this from splitting, and the pressure from the mallet is being transferred mostly due to this shoulder in here where it meets the steel, but then also the tang inside. when you're pounding on the Lie Nielsen, you're driving that piece of wood down into that socket tighter and tighter. So not that much of a difference in terms of how they actually transfer the force. Okay, let's talk about what most people would consider to be the most important. Personally, I think the ergonomics are far more important. I'll save that toward the end. But most would look at the steel and say, well, that's really going to be the determining factor. Now, I'm very familiar with the Lie Nielsen, so I can explain that one to you right off the bat. This is cryogenically treated A2 steel. Now, cryogenically treated, you may not have heard that term. You should look it up because it's actually an interesting process. In a nutshell, if you want to harden steel, you heat it up to a certain temperature and then you quench it, or you drop that temperature rapidly. If you drop it to room temperature, you attain a certain hardness. If you drop it down even lower, that's why the cryogenic bit comes in, then that serves to harden it even more. Now, this is hardened to a Rockwell of 6062, and if you're not sure what that is, well, this is a very simplified way of telling you, but they have a device that a certain amount of force is pressed onto the steel, and depending on how deep they can penetrate with that amount of force, that determines the Rockwell hardness. So most woodworking tools are going to be in the 60-62 range. You get much above that and the steel becomes brittle. Now, if you're thinking about a handsaw that you're going to sharpen with a file, that's closer to 50. But chisels, plane blades, 60-62 seems to be the sweet spot. And this is also, by the way, double heat treated or double tempered, which helps to spread out the carbon particles, which helps to eliminate any soft spots in the steel. And I don't know much about metal, but I do know that it holds an edge well, and it is easy to sharpen, contrary to what people tend to say about cryogenically treated steel. So that's the Lie Nielsen. Now the Narex, they use chrome manganese steel, and it is hardened to a Rockwell of 59. So right off the bat, you're comparing 59 to 60-62. Is there much of a difference? Well, there's going to be a difference. Might not be a tremendous amount, but certainly there's going to be a difference. And if it were a matter of which one am I going to choose based on that, well, I'm going to go with the one that's a little bit harder. Only stands to reason that the less I have to sharpen, the more time I get to actually spend using the tool. I would say right off the bat that the difference in the two steels is going to have a big impact on the actual cost of the tool. And that's the reason why the Lie Nielsen is almost 3 times the price of the Narex. At least that's what I'm suggesting. The next thing that you would expect to encounter when you're looking at comparing the quality of two tools where there's such a vast difference in price should be the quality of the machining. But there's also a school of thought difference here as well. I gave my opinion when these were being made that I wanted the sides to be parallel. Why? Well, you'll notice that a mortise chisel does not have any taper on the side. When I say that, if you look at a beveled edge chisel where the sides are relieved, that purpose or that is done so that you can get in between two tails on something like a dovetail and not bruise the side of the tail while reaching into that corner. When you're chopping a mortise, you actually want that chisel to prevent twisting as you go down. If you use a mortise chisel, a beveled edge chisel, when you try to do that, there is no reference on the sides. Whereas on a mortise chisel, if the sides are square to the back, as you're chopping, those sides help to prevent this from twisting one way or the other as you're chopping. Now, the Narex actually has tapered sides. Now, I checked them and they're not evenly. This one is tapered by about 1.5 degrees, and this one is tapered from the bottom by about 3 degrees. Not my favorite, or not my ideal mortise chisel. As I mentioned, like to have those sides parallel. Some say this is to prevent it from jamming. I've chopped a lot of mortises and I've never had a situation where my chisel jammed and I couldn't get it out of the wood. So I say buy your mortise chisels with parallel sides, and in particular sides that are square to the back. So when you're setting it on there and you're using the point as your reference, you know that the sides are going to remain parallel to that scribe line that you've used. And if you've watched my video recently on chopping a mortise, we'll leave a reference below. You'll see how when I draw some little square helper lines, along that long parallel marking gauge line. It helps as you set that chisel on that line to make sure that the side stays parallel to that long mark. Again, I'm going to say this is the better option. Now the bevel, or the angle of the bevel as it comes on the Lie Nielsen is usually 30 degrees and the Narex is 25 degrees. Now, when you're using a mortise chisel, unlike a beveled edge, you tend to be really wailing on that. You're using a mallet and you're pounding it down through, particularly a piece of hardwood. You're really hitting this thing with a lot of force. So a 30-degree bevel is going to provide you with a little more robust edge. So I would say you're probably going to be better off with a 30-degree than you are with a 25. And for most folks, they're going to be using a grinding wheel. If you're using a grinding wheel, an 8-inch wheel, and you're trying to determine, well, when am I at 25 degrees? You're going to adopt part of the shape of the wheel on your bevel. And the thicker the chisel is this way, the more pronounced that's going to be. So all you can really do in determining 25 degrees is touch at the tip and touch at the back. Well, in doing that on a thick chisel, this really dips down and provides a very thin edge here where you're absorbing all that force. So you can see this is better on here because I've actually done this. On an 8-inch wheel, you can see the hollow grind. So by keeping that at 30 degrees, you get a lot more material out here, which is going to mean your edge is going to last a lot longer. You still need to keep these nice and sharp because in the final process, you're actually going in and you're paring down that end grain wall to get the two ends of your mortise square to the face and also parallel to one another. So it has to be sharp, even though, as I said, you're going to be really wailing on it with a chisel and you want to have a little more of an obtuse angle out here as opposed to what you're finding over here. So in this case, I'm going to say stick with the 30 degree. You can easily go in and regrind this to make it match. That's not as big a deal. There's a fairly significant difference in the length. So the Lie Nielsen is going to be somewhere, including handle, around 10 inches, and the Narex is 11 3/4. Now I'm just looking at this, and let's talk a little bit about quality. If you look at this, it's well made, nicely shaped, nicely finished, and I really can't say anything about this to where I would say, okay, that needs to be improved. If you look at, if you just look at the way where this cone meets this bulky part of the chisel, everything looks very symmetrical. See that? I don't see anything there that says this was not carefully machined. If you look at this one, first of all, the ferrules are made out of some kind of a tinny wood, which doesn't look terribly appealing. You've got the end where it was turned, the point still sticking in out there. The handle has been turned on a lathe. It's got a shape that's been added to it, but you can see the sanding scratches. It's been stained. I wouldn't call this top quality by any stretch, but then again, you're only paying $25, so what do you expect? And then you can look at the grinding here, and it's okay. It's not bad, but I always like to be able to work the back of my chisel and not have any kind of an interruption. So if you see on the Lie Nielsen, if you're flattening and polishing the back of your chisel, where it droops down here, you've got some area in here that you can easily work, keep the entire chisel on your stone and not fear hitting this part with the edge of your stone. You've got a grace area that's about 1.5 inches, yeah, maybe 1.5 inches long. Whereas on this one, you literally have to stay away from the back because at some point you're going to hit that raised area and now you're bumping into this, which if you did it without knowing, you elevate your chisel and all of a sudden you're losing your flat back right out there at the tip where it matters most. How does it feel in the hand? Well, I've always said I think Lie Nielsen chisels are fantastic in terms of the ergonomics. They just feel really good. Easy to use, well balanced. This, I'm trying to be honest without showing any favoritism, but this is just bulky. It's, I can't say a whole lot of good about it. I don't find anything appealing about it. I I don't like the fact that you're not nearly as, if you look at the thickness, you have a full 1/2 inch here, whereas you don't over here. So you've got, for the actual function of the mortise chisel, and as I mentioned, keeping it from twisting when it's down into the mortise, you've got more reference surface here than you do here. The overall grind and the fit and finish is going to be better in the Lie Nielsen, but again, you're paying for that. But who really cares? What I mean by that is this. You're only going to pay for it once. You're going to use it, and this, you're not going to wear one of these out in your lifetime. So in 2 or 3 years' time, you're going to forget what you paid. But you're going to remember how well you like it every time you pick it up. And if that brings pleasure to you, well, then that was a smart move. If you pick something up and every time you use it, you think, I hate the fact that it has this, this, and this, but I bought it, I got to use it. Well, I don't think that's money well spent. This is probably the single biggest difference between inexpensive tools and expensive tools, or chisels as we're talking. Now, I said we're not going to go through and do the sharpening on this, but in preparation or in the process of preparing these chisels to at least use them to show you that part, I want to show you the big difference. So there's the Lie Nielsen that I just started. I'm working on a 500 grit Shapton, and Shapton sharpening equipment, as far as I'm concerned, is the best that you can get. As soon as I started working on this, I'm essentially touching over the entire back. Now there's the Narex. So if you look closely, I'm touching here, not all the way across. I've got about an oval shaped area here, and I'm touching back here. Now what's alarming is I'm at least 5/16 inch away from the tip. Now I'm far fussier with my beveled edge chisels than I am with my mortise chisels because, number one, the mortise chisel, no part of what it does actually is ever seen. It's inside the joint, unlike a beveled edge, but it's also used with a lot of brute force. However, if I want to get a decent edge, I need to have this contacting this, and I need to have this back flat. Well, that represents a ton of work to get rid of this high area so that I finally get down and bring that polish right out to the tip. I look at that and I said, there's no way that I'm going to spend this amount of time on a $25 chisel. Completely, complete game changer for me. I'll do my best to at least put a quick edge on so we can test it in the wood, but that would be the game changer. That, in my opinion, this is worth 10 times the price just to avoid having to spend the next hour and a half trying to get that back flat. Now I'm using what most would call a carver's mallet. We make these. They're maple, resin impregnated, so increases the weight about 30%, makes it a lot harder, just so that you know. I've got my gauge line on here on my right. I've got some perpendicular marks to help align it. So what I'm going to do is come in here and set that so that the cutting edge is parallel to that line, and I'm holding it so that I can see plumb. Now I'm not going to chop a whole lot with this. I just want to get a quick feel of how it is in the hand. Now you can't see it, but the chisel has a tendency to want to slide off to my left, and I don't quite know why. I wouldn't say that it feels great. It's almost a little bit clumsy. Now, my ability to keep that on the line for some reason, and this just came out of the box, so I haven't done anything to it other than what you've watched. It wants to slide off to the left, and I don't know whether that's because there's more relief angle on one side than the other. I really can't. But would I choose that for this job? Well, let's see. Try the Lie Nielsen. I've used this a lot, so this is Might be a little bit unfair, but I am very familiar with the chisel. You've got to get a little relief spot first before the chisel can start to penetrate any depth. Now, right off the bat, I like the fact that this is a little smaller. It feels so much better in the hand. There's really sharp edges on this. This, as I said earlier, is a little bit clumsy. If it weren't for the fact that the sides are not parallel and they're not square to the back, I'd say if you're faced with a budget, this would do. The work that it would take to go in and correct that sides is beyond what I would even want to bother trying. And the fact that the back is so far out of being flat, the amount of work involved, not interested. Absolutely not interested. I'd say save your money until you can buy a chisel that all of that hard work has been done for you. All you have to do is come in and just do some light work on the back, getting it prepped, sharpen the edge, sharpen the bevel, and you've got a chisel that's going to last you for life and make you happy every time you use it. This is by far the best of the bunch. You don't need a ton of them. In fact, I would suggest if you had 1/4 and 1/2, you would probably get by when you consider that the rule for cutting a mortise and tenon is typically 1/3 of the thickness of the piece. And the two types, or the two dimensions that we most commonly use in building furniture are 3/4 or 1.5 inches. That would either make for a 1/4 inch mortise or a 1/2 inch mortise. So you don't have to go out and buy a full set. Well, that's my 2 cents worth. If you enjoy my method of work and like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. Now, I've always said, better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the icon with the plane and the chisel, it'll take you to our website, introduce you to all of our tools that we actually manufacture right here, as well as our workshops, both in person and online. Good luck.